Hello and welcome to my channel. In today's video, I'm going to talk about the golden period of European history, which is the Renaissance period. In the Renaissance period, there was a revival of the European culture, economy, art, literature, and it was the Middle Ages between 14th and 17th centuries. So, the literary as well as the artistic, political, economic, cultural life of the Europeans got revived. It was a rebirth, and there was a lot of development during this period. In the Renaissance period, there was a transition. A lot of discoveries were taking place. The Roman Catholic Church had fallen along with the Holy Roman Empire, and there was a rise of democratism as well as city states and national monarchs. Several nationalities were formed and national languages were introduced along with their flags. The feudal system had declined, which prevailed in the 9th to 15th century. The structure of the society was such that under the monarchs there were several feudal lords. This was a hierarchical system of the economy where the monarchs were they were the ultimate rulers who had several ministers and feudal lords. These feudal lords used to have land holdings and used to provide protection and security, that is military security, to its people. In return, these feudal lords used to collect taxes. So the peasants and the farmers used to pay them fees or taxes, which over time used to increase, and this was a lot of burden on the normal peasants and the farmers. So in the Middle Ages during the Renaissance period, this system was completely declined. So after the decline of the Roman Church and also the demolition of the feudal system, there was a rise of the People's Democrats. There were lots of innovations and new ideas which came in forward in the Renaissance period, especially the introduction of the printing press. Before this period, books and materials, newspapers used to be handwritten, but now because of the introduction of the printing press, moving metals were used to print. So German printer Johannes Gutenberg was credited with the innovation of the printing press. The first printed book, which was mechanically printed by Gutenberg, was in Latin language. It was an edition of the Bible in 1455. Earlier books, which were called as manuscripts, were written by hand. Even the books were copied by hand, which took a lot of time, and they were also very costly. And most of the books which were written in Europe were in Latin language, which was basically a scholarly language which the common people could not understand. Most of the books were written in Latin language, which was of a scholarly nature, and they were very costly and could only be afforded by the rich class of people. But after the advent of the printing press, huge volumes of books started being published. Books of various vernacular languages were also published. Vernacular means informal ways of speaking. So, because of the printing of books, various religious ideas, scientific ideas, poetry, art, as well as biographies could be easily circulated and read. These gave boost to a number of authors and writers who started writing more, and new writers were introduced. Even leaders came into contact with the common man as they could spread their knowledge as well as could communicate with the people. Apart from this, there were other various kinds of common innovations, like the mariner's compass was innovated. Then there was high quality paper, gunpowder, as well as industrialization boosted. Renaissance art, art and painting, as well as architecture, as well as music and literature flourished during this period between the 14th and the 16th centuries. The founder of the Renaissance painting was Masaccio between 1404 to 28. He was a very intellectual painter and had a high degree of naturalism in his work. He was known for his intellectuality. He had drawn various frescoes, which are wall paintings on the Trinity in the Church of Santa Maria Novella as well as Santa Maria del Carmine. Florence in Italy became the center for art, sculpture, as well as in architecture. Renaissance painting first emerged and began in Italy in the 14th century. It reached its zenith and the highest point in the 15th and the 16th century. There were magnificent artists as well as three masters who had emerged during this period, who were well known: Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, and Raphael. Leonardo da Vinci was known as the Renaissance man. He was a genius. He was known for his high intellect, talent, and art. Amongst his notable works are Mona Lisa, which is known as a realistic painting and is famous all over the world. Then the Virgin of Rocks, as well as the fresco painting called as The Last Supper. It shows his ability to portray human figures in relation to animals as well as their natural surroundings and objects, as well as there is a landscape behind every portrait. Michelangelo Buonarroti, who was also a genius and a well known artist, sculptor, poet, he drew various human bodies on a vast scale. His magnificent pieces are kept at St. Peter's Cathedral. One of them is David, which is carved out of a single enormous marble block, which measures around 5 meters in height. His giant frescoes or wall paintings are depicted on the ceilings of the Sistine Chapel, which depicts the story of God's creation of the world. The third amongst the masters of art was Raphael Sanzio, who was the youngest amongst Leonardo as well as Michelangelo. He had learned from both the masters. His notable work is the School of Athens. This is a painting which was painted in the Vatican in 1508 to 11. Another important and famous Florentine painter was Giotto di Bondone. He was the most famous artist of that time. He represented human body very realistically, and his frescoes are decorated at the cathedrals of Assisi in Rome, in Padua, in Florence as well as in Naples. All these pieces of art architecture were all commissioned by the rich merchants and families of Florence. One of the famous merchants who had commissioned all these arts was the rich Lorenzo de' Medici. He was also called as the Magnificent. He had a very strong leadership and also support of arts. Apart from art and sculpture, literature also flourished during this period. The style of poetry became more musical, and when poetry is displayed with music, it is called as lyrics. So, most of the writers at that time used to compose at least one work which was a lyric. In those days, sonnets were also famous. Sonnets are basically poems which are of 14 lines and it has got a rhythmic structure. Notable poets of those times were William Shakespeare, Christopher Marlowe, John Milton, and Ben Jonson. One of the most famous English playwright, poet, and actor was William Shakespeare, who was born on the 23rd of April 1564 at Stratford in Avon, which is in United Kingdoms. He is known as the greatest amongst the writers in English language and is known as the Bard of Avon. William Shakespeare's father was John Shakespeare and mother Mary Arden. He was educated at the King Edward Grammar School in Stratford, where he learned Latin and Greek language. Shakespeare had married Anne Hathaway, who was 7 or 8 years elder than him, and had two daughters, Susanna and Judith. He had written more than 30 plays in his lifetime, in all categories, including histories, comedies, tragedies, as well as romances. Earliest plays were known as Henry VI and Comedy of Errors, which were mostly based on history. in 1596. Then he wrote Romeo and Juliet, which was a tragedy and romance of all time. It was the romance between two Italian youths who were from rival families. Other notable works of William Shakespeare are Julius Caesar, Hamlet, Othello, King Lear, Macbeth, Antony and Cleopatra, and romances like Cymbeline, A Winter's Tale, and Tempest. He then retired from stage in 1612 and died on the 23rd of April 1616 and was buried at the Stratford Church.